I would like to ask you more about the role of the digital operating partner. And in fact, as you'd mentioned earlier, you wrote a book called The Private Equity Digital Operating Partner, and we'll include links to that in our show notes. But could you tell our listeners more about the concept and how it can benefit private equity firms? And Bruce, I think you would admit it's not exactly every day, every private equity firm where they have a digital operating partner. So, could you tell us more about that concept and its benefit to PE firms?
Sure, and it's true that there's very few firms that do have digital auditors. The concept is again just the same as an operating partner. That operating partner might be a supply chain expert. They would look at each of the companies and the type of companies that the firm would purchase would generally, if they have a supply chain expert, it means that that's kind of the niche that they're focused on. And so for each of the portfolio companies, this operating partner would look at the company and try to find a proprietary and create value with their expertise in that, in this example, supply chain. In our example, the digital operating partner, we don't do IT, we don't do ERP, that middle area either. We don't. But what we do is we look at a company and we look for a proprietary angle that feeds into the digital investment thesis. And we try to understand with all these levers that we have at our disposal, how do we create value? So the concept of of digital operating partners and having a fractional digital owner is that it's just it doesn't replace the existing operational improvement team or value creation team, what it's called, or maybe you don't even have a team. But what it's meant to do is to look at deals, and if that's close, or look at companies post close and try to identify where can we create value by using at a core, again, the Internet of Things. So we put sensors on things and then artificial intelligence or data science in some cases. And how do we create value? So it's just a very focused expertise on digital technology and then marrying that with the understanding of private equity, but looking at how do we create an investment thesis strictly on digitals. And we model this as well. If you're going to put in $1, what are you going to get back in terms of the return on investment? So it's really high level, the exact same thing as any other operating partner, except for in this case, it's not in house. You're using it because maybe not all your fit the characteristics of how I could help, how digital operating partners can help. So it's bringing in an operating partner that, whether it's myself or someone else on my team, that has high experience and potentially, hopefully, at a very high level, the sector as well, because there is importance on the sector and in particular how things work. But it's just bringing in an expert that looks at a deal with a different eye. And sometimes this is looked at before close, so diligence. They want to maybe have a little bit more conviction on the price, and so they may price the deal at what they how they currently do it, and then they may tap us to say, okay, we're thinking, and they're not going to give us the numbers obviously, but we're thinking this is something we're interested in. Where do you see some extra value? And then we can look at, in the case of diligence, we can look at the company and say, look, we think that these are the four main areas where we create value. Very roughly, this is what we think the return on the technology investment would be. And then the buyer can then use that to maybe up their bid, because often these are not proprietary deal auctions, and that just gives them a little bit more conviction about it. So yeah, high level, it's the same as any other operating partner, except for the expertise has been the stuff I've been speaking about up until now.
Bruce, what would you say, or what are the specific or the most common challenges do private equity firms face when it comes to digital transformation, based on your experience?
It's just awareness. I think there's awareness now, from even a year before, there was like very little awareness. People have heard AI and this and that, but at least now there's a little bit more awareness. But I would say that's the biggest challenge is still awareness that there is. This is just another tool, just another tool in the PE firm's arsenal to be able to create value. But there is another way of creating value for certain types of companies. And so most of the challenges is really just awareness and not knowing that it's there. Once I engage with a PE firm and we start talking the language that they understand, and that goes back to the creation techniques, but just using digital instead, it all clicks in. It all comes down to the same thing. Effectively, is if we take $1 of money that comes from the portfolio, can we invest it? What's the best way that we can invest that? And so what I propose to the companies I work with is do that with all the different value creation techniques, do it with digital, and then base it on the return on investment. And it really just comes down to that. So Yeah, I think it all comes down, in my view. I love the technology. As you heard, I'm a nerd originally, but what I like is value creation even more. And even more than that, I like quantify it's being created so that our customers, that being the PE firms, a leg up at the beginning or in the middle, and then specifically on exit.
So,
Because the nice thing is there's always let's say, a roadmap. And so once you've started the structural changes, you've identified the roadmap. So whether that's going to be another sponsor that's going to or sell to a strategic, there's lots of work to do on exit as well. We can just leave it at that.
So, Bruce, just to drill a little deeper there, you mentioned earlier how you utilize modeling in a previous answer. You talked about this idea of modeling. Can you walk our listeners through the value discovery process that Digital Operating Partners uses, or in your book, uses to identify untapped value within portfolio companies? And how does that tie into this idea that you've described previously with proprietary data? Can you walk us through that process of value discovery a little deeper?
Sure, sure. So let's talk about a few different types of models. So the first thing is everyone should be aware, and is sometimes isn't as clear in the popular media, but artificial intelligence, data science are based on models. So effectively, what is you're building a model. You take a certain amount of data, it could be a subset of that you have in hand, and you build a model, and then you improve that model over time, and use this model to approximate reality. And so in a lot of cases, the models that we build are a digital twin, and then what we're doing is we're simulating the way that this wood chipper, as an example, works. The second type of model is so I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but the model is we modeling our return on technology investment. And so that's looking at the company structure, that's looking at margins, that's looking at where we think we can improve revenue growth, where we think we can improve margin, and then how we think that we the exit multiple. And each of these we model as well in terms of how does it impact valuation. So at the end of the day, we're going to be looking at EBITDA and at how does revenue growth and margin in EBITDA, and then we're going to look at how does what we're expand the exit multiple. So that's a very high level. How the process that we look at is kind of based on a playbook that I've developed before that. It was similar, but maybe called different names. But there's a playbook that we kind of go through. That's almost like before a flight takes off, the pilots go through a checklist. And so what we have is a very broad checklist that's been based on the last 7 years or so of our experience, and we kind of just in a very numb way go through each one of those and then try to project it onto the company, the portfolio company. And then it's kind of like, let's say, a bottoms up approach. So we're making sure we're not missing anything. The top down approach is generally it's going to come from imagination. And this is really looking at this wood chipper, going back to that example, and seeing, wow, what I really see here, and I'm just making this up, is wood chipper insurance is super expensive. Here's an opportunity for product expansion for this wood chipper firm. Let's build in a model. In this case, it's how does the wood chipper used and what's it used for? Let's build in a model, going back to what I was saying, for creating insurance and then being able to price and underwrite that insurance, and the company can underwrite an institution. But in any case, at a top level, you might just be using your imagination and just looking at the market dynamics. What sectors is the company in? What are the competitors of this company? And then what are the macro dynamics of that industry? And what we're looking for in all cases is going to be some tailwinds that will only improve over time. And so that's kind of the top down approach is just using experience, using your experience and your imagination to say, and then looking at the sector, looking at the competitive space. It could be, for example, how are they losing against their next best competitor? So it sounds pretty thorough a little bit, because it is, in the sense that it's really just looking at the situation, using experience and using imagination to create an investment thesis. The other way where I started is using the playbook, and that's just a brain dead approach of just going through one thing after another. So that's the approach. That's the approach that we take.